this, it is much more aggressive in its transmission than anything that we have seen in recent history. It's probably more akin to the 1918 pandemic.
Republican Senator Richard Burr issued that dire warning to a private audience back in February, weeks after dumping up to $1.7 million in stock. The pre-lockdown sell-off has raised questions over whether the Intelligence Committee chairman had some intel of his own about how the virus would tank the market. And now it turns out he wasn't the only one in his family to benefit from a well-timed stock sale. ProPublica reports that Burr's brother-in-law, Gerald Fouth, a Trump appointee on the National Mediation Board, also sold tens of thousands of dollars worth of shares just before the market crashed. Joining me now is attorney Midwin Charles and Robert Federucci of ProPublica. Thank you both for being here. And Robert, I'll start with you. Just explain how this went down, because this does sound like they, and maybe some other senators as well, traded on inside information.
So like you mentioned, and as we reported a few weeks ago, Senator Burr sold a significant portion of his stock holdings on February 13th. What we discovered last week, and that was about a week before the market crash, what we discovered last week was that his brother-in-law, Gerald Fouth, who is on the National Mediation Board and therefore needs to disclose his securities trading as well, sold on the exact same day between $97,000 and $280,000 worth of stock. We reached out. I gave Gerald Fouth a call. I called him on his cell phone. I asked him if he and Senator Burr coordinated, and he immediately hung up on me.
Interesting. And just FYI for the audience, Donald Trump appointed Mr. Fouth to the National Mediation Board back in 2017, and that is a federal agency that facilitates labor management relations within the nation's railroad and airline industry, just FYI. Here is the statement that Mr. Burr issued about his stock sales. And he said, I relied solely on public news reports to guide my decision regarding sale of stocks on February 13th. Specifically, I closely followed CNBC's daily health and science reporting out of its Asia bureaus at the time, understanding any assumptions could make in hindsight. However, I spoke this morning with the chairman of the Senate Ethics Committee and asked him to open a complete review of the matter with full transparency. He unloaded, by the way, $628,000, between $628,000 and $1.272 million of his holdings after on February 13th in 33 transactions. Kelly Loeffler of Georgia also did so. James Imhoff of Oklahoma also did so. Dianne Feinstein also had some stock sales as well. Midwin, there was a major briefing on the intelligence in the Senate Intelligence Committee in January about this, and you did have senators going back and telling their constituents, hey, something's going down, at least their donors. Is this a crime? Is this a potential crime? I mean, what kind of legal liability could they be facing?
Well, I think it's important to first kind of go over what is insider trading, right? Insider trading is trading on stock to your own advantage on the basis of confidential information. In other words, the information is not publicly available. Now, as you mentioned, Senator Burr is chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He also sits on the Health Committee. So it's incredibly likely, it's incredibly possible that he had access to confidential information about what was going on with the ensuing pandemic, but also with respect to whether or not the United States was prepared to meet this impending pandemic, right? I mean, he penned an op-ed piece in early February, I'm talking about Senator Burr, in which he said that America was prepared to meet this pandemic. We had everything in place and everything is going to be fine. And yet it appears as though he was also saying something completely different. So insider trading is a very serious crime. The maximum fine to be paid is $5 million for individuals, $25 million for an entity, a maximum penalty of 20 years in jail. Now, a lot of people almost never get these maximums. We know, for example, with Martha Stewart, she did 5 months in jail for something similar. It was proven by trial that she did this. So as someone who did securities litigation at my old firm 13, 14 years ago, I can tell you insider trading is a very, very serious crime. And this looks bad and it smells bad. So I think investigators are going to do a very good job of looking into who knew what when, and whether or not the trades were based on confidential information, not public information, but confidential information.
Right. You know, and you know, Robert, when you have, you know, Mr. Burr, the chairman, as you said, of the Senate, as Midwin just said, of the Senate Intelligence Committee, telling a closed-door audience of high-ranking, sort of, you know, the high-wealth donors, you know, hey, this thing is more like the 1918 pandemic. Not long after he sold stock, it seems other than coincidental that his brother-in-law also sells a lot of stock. I mean, have you been able to find any evidence that they connected with each other and discussed these stock sales, or that they were completely separate in their actions?
So we reached out to Senator Burr's attorney, and what we got back was a very carefully worded statement. What she said was that Senator Burr did not coordinate his decision to trade on February 13th with Mr. Falth. The more I think about the statement, the more I realize it's really saying very little. And she didn't respond to our primary question, which was, did Senator Burr share any information he learned as a senator with any of his relatives? She declined to answer that question. What's interesting to me about this development is, you know, we know that the FBI was poking around about these trades. There's now a new front, potentially, in their investigation. They can go to Senator Burr's brother-in-law and ask him, what, if anything, did the senator tell you? So now it's no longer simply in Senator Burr's mind what his motivations were when he's trading. They have someone to ask who may be able to shed some light on what his mindset was.
Yeah, drip, drip, drip. Midwin Charles, Robert Federici, thank you both very much. Stay safe out there. And coming up at noon, Charlemagne the God.